Welcome to the Human Factors and Ergonomics Hub, a series of educational podcasts that showcase the connection between human capabilities and good work design, brought to you by the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society of Australia. Hi, it's great to be with you on the HFE Hub. Thanks for joining me. I'm Sharon Todd, and today my special guest is Andrew Wright. Andrew is a principal human factors consultant at Tactix Sener, primarily supporting the transport, nuclear and defence industries throughout their product and system lifecycle and providing experience design in digital and built environments. So Andrew, it's a great pleasure to have you on the HFE Hub podcast, and I'm really wanting to chat with you about user testing. But firstly, for our audience, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Okay, well, thanks, Sharon, and pleasure to be here. So, as you know, I'm a human factors ergonomic consultant. I'm a CPE. I reside in New South Wales, Australia. I enjoy being part of the community. But maybe my journey, if we could say, like, how did I get here? So a little bit twists and turns. So I realized that human factors and ergonomics is a much wider field, and it actually originally came out of psychology in the human factors area. And so I went back to school and did a master's in human factors. And then from there, I just expanded out to working across a really broad range, everything from engineering to physical problems to organizational problems to cognitive, the whole range of things, all kinds of different areas. And one of them is user testing, which is, I think, what we would think we might chat about today.
Your background is not dissimilar to mine, so it's lovely to sort of talk to someone where it's not dissimilar. So user testing,
it gives a kind of a breadth, doesn't it? If you have a few different pieces and twists and turns along the way.
It does, and I think the relevancy of human factors and ergonomics is better understood when you understand another industry or another part of work. And just your interest in stopping people being injured is exactly where my head was at when I started my master's as well. So it's great when I hear someone say the same thing.
Oh.
You've been user testing, so let's just talk about maybe what user testing is and then how did you get there?
Again, I was working on projects and there were people doing, this is in the US, and there were people doing usability and user testing. And that was actually how I first ended up, doing my master's. And I really appreciated it because it put the people who were going to be using the product or the system in a place where it could be seen how it would work for them. And I just really found it interesting that it sometimes would uncover things that weren't predicted or expected. And it seemed quite easy and economical, and it was, highly respected. It had been used a long time. So I kind of developed an interest into it from seeing other people doing it and seeing it work well. So it was one of the things I made sure I trained in and started to do.
So you talked about products and how they work. So can you maybe have a chat with us about the kinds of products where you do user testing, and then we can talk about why you've done it?
Yeah, I would say now I work a lot in safety critical areas and large infrastructure projects. So that the kind of user testing I do now, maybe not necessarily a product. It could be a larger work environment or a control room or a maintenance facility or something like that, where it could be a train station and, it could be dealing with the public. But, originally, so just because I was in the San Francisco area. So, like, for instance, if you have a website or a device like that and you want to know, well, how would this website work for the people who are going to use it? So it's actually quite easy with electronic things like that or media. You can create a mock-up of it or a prototype of it. It doesn't have to be fancy or complete, but enough so that you can test the features on it and the logic of it. And then you can give it to people and ask them to navigate through it and do things and find out how it works for them. Some things you'd think would have worked do work. Some things you think would have worked don't work. people will suggest things you never thought of that make it better. And so capturing that input from users can be done for a lot of different products. But like a classic one is anything in the IT area. Could be tools, anything that can be sort of prototyped. User testing is done typically with a prototype or a mock-up of the final thing. So it could be a hand tool, it could be design of equipment, it could be a website, it could be any kind of interface. There's a lot of different products where somebody would use them that you can do that for.
You mentioned people come on with great suggestions, and my brain always thinks of modelling, because I work in more physical space myself. So, I'm used to sort of mocking up things with cardboard and flute board and other things. If we're talking about the projects that you've worked on, maybe pull up a project that you're working on at the moment, and maybe let's talk about some of the suggestions that may have come from the users during the usability test.
Yeah, so for instance, we're looking at an area, maintenance area. I won't say where it is exactly, but where trains come in and out of, and people work on them, and they have an alarm system, right? And that's linked to the train movement that lets people in there know, hey, there's a train coming, like move out of the way. And so we could do things like we could place the warning lights and beacons up in different places, and we can talk about virtual reality, like digital environments, in a minute. But by having an environment where people are immersed in there, they can tell us if they would see them or not. They can tell us how close together they would like them. We can show people different variants of that. Do they want them at every pole, every second one? People can say things like, okay, they're great there, but over here is where we would walk all the time. We would need something there. So you can put people in the environment in a way that they're immersed in it as an end user or representing the end user, and then they can tell you things that you don't have to build a whole facility to do that. They can tell you before you've built it, and it gives a really good leg up for how to design in this case, it would be the safety system there.
So it enables a better ability to understand the way the work is done and what people see and don't see that they may not have told you before.
There's a couple of things to this. So there's a phrase in design. It's like the designer is not the user, right? So that's and often the person who's designing it knows more about it than the person who would be using it. And so, in order to make sure a design will work as would be intended, for its final use, it's very important to involve people who would be the end users or who can realistically represent them, right? And so this is true no matter what it is. It like, for instance, Microsoft was initially, they had a lot of usability products or issues with their products because they would test them internally on their design engineers, who of course knew what something was for and how it worked, and they would know all the technical things. But then somebody out there in the public without that same background, it wouldn't be intuitive to them. So you want to make sure that things that may be intuitive to the designer, because they're very familiar with that whole system, they know that very well, they're a professional at it, that's what they do. They may not always anticipate what somebody who doesn't have their background, who's actually going to be using it, would have. So if you bring in people who can realistically simulate how it's going to be used, then you can cover off things that maybe you almost know too much about it as you're designing it because you're too much of an expert. So you basically want to recreate it in an environment or a dynamic that lets you understand how it will be used.
Do you need to understand some of the decisions that they need to make?
People won't always use something in the way that it's anticipated they will. So there are always surprises, let's say. And sometimes they're pleasant and sometimes they're not pleasant. But you want to... So if we come back to human factors in ergonomics, it's right in the term, like user testing, right? So the key thing is understanding who the user will be. So who they are, what they'll be doing, why they'll be doing it, where they'll be doing it. So there's a series of questions there that you have to answer, right? And in some ways, the why they'll be doing it is quite important because it's not always, people may have secondary things they, do, people use something like they could get laptop and use it as a doorstop, or they could put it, that people could do all kinds of things you would think of. It's got to be strong enough to handle things you wouldn't think of. So you have to think through who the user is, what they're doing with it, why they're doing it, and where they'll be doing it. And then if you can answer those questions, you can think about, how would I test that? And what kind of decisions people would be making is very much linked to why they're doing something, where they're doing it, what they're doing with it, and who they are, basically. So it kind of comes back to those four things.
So if you have all that information and you're going to proceed with user testing a project, what are some of the ways that you actually conduct the user testing?
Okay, so you mean different kind of tools, methods, things like that?
Yeah.
There's methods of creating an environment to understand. If we want to think that what we're wanting to do is understand how a person will behave with this product or a system when they use it, systematically understand that. So then we need to think of what would they be doing with it? What environment would it be? There's what's called low fidelity and high fidelity testing. If we were to think of, let's say we're thinking of a smartphone, right? And we have an app for a smartphone. A low fidelity testing could just be stuff that's written on paper or cards, handwritten with a pencil. And it could show, like if you press that button on the app, it would open the next page. It would do, and then you could and another page would represent that. So it's quite, on one hand, it's quite crude, right? So that's low fidelity testing. But low fidelity testing is really important for two reasons. One is it's inexpensive. It's quick to develop. It doesn't take 6 months and a whole team to develop it. It's very quick. And the second is users will actually give really good feedback on low fidelity mock-ups of a design because they feel they can be more honest. Right. This is actually, so you actually at that early stage in a project, you really want to have all the flaws pointed out, and you want to understand, right? It's an iterative design process. You start where you start, you keep improving, and then you end up with the final thing. So you want to start off with low fidelity models, get quick feedback. It's quick to do, improve it, retest, and work like that. And so that's that. And then once the design is on track, once it's been validated that this is a good direction and these are the basic features, then you would build a more high fidelity model that takes more time to do and probably more accurately simulates the final version. Again, if we were looking at a website, that could be done on a more graphic software, or there's programs now that actually work like the website, that hyperlinks work on them, and so that would more accurately represent the final thing. And so then the more the nuances of the design and the details of how it's used would be out. So there's an iterative process like that. So you don't necessarily only use a test once. You do it low fidelity and high fidelity, and even within that range, sometimes you might even do it more than once. If you can just quickly update it based on the user feedback. The second thing is you need end user representatives. So they don't have to be the people who would eventually use it, but they have to know enough to simulate that person. If it's something highly technical, like it's to do with neurosurgery, you'd probably need neurosurgeons, somebody who could do that. But in many cases, if you want someone's a maintainer, maybe someone who's an engineer or someone else who works there would do well enough. So you need people who could accurately represent it. The end user representatives. You actually don't need that many. The research says between 5 and 8 people for a user test. So which is actually lower than you would often see. Sometimes in situations, maybe if you're doing a whole train station and there's a huge range of users, you would do more. But in most situations, 5 to 8 is what's considered normal, because what happens is once you get before 5 people, there's maybe not enough. You may miss some issues with the design because you just haven't had enough eyeballs on it. Once you've got to 8, you're reaching a point of diminishing returns, because the different elements of the design, and I'm sure you found this yourself, but the different elements of the design that people are going to find that people are just repeating them. So then you're better off to not keep testing the same design. You're better off to get the feedback, update the design, and then get another 5 or 8 people rather than, get 16 people in one go. So you need to have the end users, you need a certain number of them, and then you have a lot of different methods and modalities. The term user testing is a little bit of a global term. I would say it's methodologies used to understand and predict users' behavior with a new system or product. It's generally done with a new system or product because if it's something that's off the shelf or it's just something already used, you can probably predict. Like, there's not a lot of information that would come out of users. It has to be novel or complex in some way, or just, that okay, there's no basis to just say, okay, this design's going to work. We'd like to ask the users. So you predict them based on a new or a different thing. There's what's called usability testing, which there's International Standards Organization have guidelines for how to do that. It's like 9241. There's a whole series of clauses for that. I'll just read out the formal definition there because there is one. It's the extent to which a product can be used by a specified user to achieve specified goals with effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction in a specified context of use. So, and all those are technical terms that have meanings that I don't think we need to get into now, but it's like, how can it do what we want it to do? Can it do it quickly and easily? Do people enjoy using it? So there's specific criteria there. That's why if someone does a usability test in any industry or anything and they use the same standard, they should be using the same criteria so someone else could look at it. There's also what's called user experience or UX, which was originally, I would say, a sort of a subset of usability. That's where the satisfaction. That is more like people's perceptions, responses resulting from the use or anticipated use of a system. So it's more of an affective thing based on emotions, beliefs, preferences, many other sort of aspects to it. These days, those two are almost subdivided. So user experience is more, it's probably less technical and it's more about the user's perceptions and feelings and insights about using it, where usability is a bit more technical about, well, how well did it work? When they did it, it may sort of consider other things more related to the results or how successful the item was used. I would tend to use both of those methods at once. Like, I don't see there's any need to arbitrarily separate them because we just want to get in users who are good representatives of the end user and find out how it works for them and what they have to say about it. So that's kind of a bit of a summary like that. But I'm just mentioning that because you will see different sort of terms used. You'll also see customer-centered design, which is more looking at, wouldn't be like a maintenance person. It would be like someone catching a train or something like that. You'll also see there's this idea of something being user-centered design rather than user-led design. So user-centered is, okay, we really want to focus on designing it to work well for the user. User-led design is when a significant amount of weight is given to the user's experience in doing it, which we may not necessarily want to do because there may be an objective to using something that, while it may not be their preference, that's still like somebody might like to hold a knife by the blade because it feels nice, but we can't design something for them to do. Right? It's just because someone you test has a preference, that doesn't mean that changes the whole design, basically. So it's user-centered, not user-led. And then there's a number of different modalities you can use. You mentioned, so you can make physical models. They can be, and often are, as simple as cardboard. You can make things with cardboard, or duct tape can be involved. You can go a level above that, but sometimes you can make a mock-up of a bench or a table or something, or or a tool. You can make it out of wood. You can, if it's a more of an electronic interface, you can make mock-ups out of paper. As I said, paper representations or digital models that you use on screen or on a smartphone or an iPad. Increasingly these days, because the technology has improved a lot, you'll see digital environments, immersive digital environments, and that could be virtual reality. You see with the goggles on, the headset on, where it really is immersed, and it's a three-dimensional model that the end user representative is immersed in. There's also augmented reality, which is typically actually a combination. The way I've mostly used it is a combination of virtual reality and physical models. So you could have a model of a driver's station in a train, and you can have a headset on with a virtual model of it, and you can have a physical model in front of you that is also it's consistently the same shape as a digital model with things on it people can physically touch as well. So you can combine them. You see other things like there's augmented reality, just like Google glasses and things. You've probably seen things like that where you can put them on, and that's where it's mainly normal sensory with some input. And then the one I just described is that the visual input is completely digital, but there would be some physical input at the same time. So there's lots of different ways to do it, and it just depends on what you're testing. Because I'm these days very often testing physical spaces or activities that take place in large physical spaces, that lends itself to VR or to AR. But there's no reason to not use less fancy, less high-tech ones as part of that, or at a lower fidelity. And then the high fidelity would be the VR, the virtual reality.
Do you find circumstances where the users prefer a particular type of thing? I mean, if you were going to give me an option for VR or augmented reality, I would probably prefer augmented because there's a bit of physical stuff in there. So it's a bit more tangible. Is that the response that you get from users?
I think it depends. Like the thing with virtual reality these days is, even compared to 5 years ago, so you can walk around in it. So, I mean, I guess the floor is always, you could say, I guess it's always AR in a sense, because you're walking on the floor. So these virtual reality environments, the dimensions in them are basically 1-to-1. So if something looks like it's 2 meters away, it really probably would be 2 meters away. And if you walked 2 meters, you would be standing against it. It knows how tall you are, because it's calibrated with your feet on the floor. It knows which way you're looking. So, but it depends on, like, if you're dealing with something fairly finite, like a control panel or, an operator's cab or something like that, which is a fairly stable environment, then it's fairly easy and, in fact, advantageous to build a physical model. If it's a large area, like a large machining area or workshop, it could be something that's 50 meters across. It actually makes sense in that place for it to be purely digital, just because it's far more practical. So that's kind of a design decision to make, depending on what information you want to get out of the testing. But if it's a physical station where somebody's fixed, like they're at a table or a desk, it's always better to. There's two ways to do it. You can have it as AR, where it's part of it, or you can, if you have computer monitors, you can have them digitally. Then you can also have physical representations of them, and people can just check their assumptions or their understandings that they got in the digital environment. So you can have a second layer of information about it. It'll make it a more kind of secure understanding.
Wow, I hadn't thought of using both. Can we talk about a project that you're working on? You've obviously talked about, rail. That might be the area where you're working at the moment. But can you walk us through a project where you've used some of these tools and how it's worked and what some of the outcomes may have been? Or
it depends on the project. It depends. So, I mean, I've done it all kinds of things, but the way it's often used is to answer design questions cheaply and simply before something's built that can't easily be answered simply by engineers and other experts, subject matter experts looking at design models. So the way you would always want to think about user testing is, okay, when would getting information from users help the design? So that would be the first question. Second is, you can't, some things just don't lend themselves to that. It may be better to do another kind of analysis than something where we're talking to the users about it, because it may not be possible to recreate it physically, or there may be too many complex steps. It's better to do it by task analysis or workload analysis or another method. So user testing is a method that exists alongside many other methods. It doesn't answer all the questions. It's a way of getting input from users in a reliable and consistent way. And then that can feed back into from that there can be certain requirements. And by that I mean, whether it's a tool, whether it's a workshop, whatever it needs to be able to, the design needs to let people do this, whatever it is, something they need to reach or see. It can be very good for understanding, will somebody be able to see everything in the room? If let's say it's a control room, I've done that a few times. Can they see everything around the room they need to see? If it's like a specific example was in a station control room, they have to be able to see the gate and the turnstiles. There was a window there. Okay, there's a window in the control room. They can see it. When we did the testing, and this was using virtual reality, we put a desk in the room. And if somebody's sitting at the desk, they couldn't see it. Like if you're just looking at a design, even a 3D digital design, you can't really tell. But if you actually have we recreate the room, the turnstiles are exactly where they were. You put somebody in it, can you see it? No, they can't. They can't see it from there. They'd have to stand up and lean over all the way to the side and do that. And can you count on people doing that? No. Like realistically, with that kind of an effort, that's something that's, so you can have a design, like on paper, it looks like, okay, there's a window and it's a head. But if you actually look at where the person would be in the room doing their job, which they'd be doing it sitting at the desk, they wouldn't be able to see it. So then we could just play around with moving the desk. If we move the desk and change the window position slightly, then it worked. But then we could say, okay, this control room, this will work as it's intended to work. We could say that, certainly. So there's questions like that you can answer by putting somebody in the physical space and having them do it. So that's the kind of thing that I've been doing more recently. Another kind of user testing, this wasn't in rail, it was in the control room, I think it was the nuclear space. We just had a look at some of the monitored systems there that give the status of different things around the plant. And we had a look at the colors, right? And they were using, it was a white background, and they had brown, and they had brown was the normal color, and red was the thing if there's an alarm, like there's a problem, something's out of range. And we had people look at it, and when we gave them that example and we changed the background color, I think we changed it from brown to blue. So that's something that just from human factors is different frequency, light frequencies, and people see things differently. And we could give it to the end users, have a look at both of these, which is easy to tell apart. And they said, okay, this color change made that whole system far more easy to see. So it took a lot of effort out of the user. They didn't have to really stare at it to see the differences, because the differences, especially you could think at night or somebody's been on the shift for a while, it's sort of that kind of thing's harder to see. So we could and one of the things in user testing that I haven't covered yet is, but you don't want to ask leading questions. So in this case, you don't want to say, oh, we've got two colors. Don't you agree the blue one is much better? Right? there's a lot of things you want to be really quite neutral, right? And so you're just presenting the question to the user, and then they can provide feedback and they can describe it. And then if you do that with 5 people and they all say essentially the same thing, then that's a pretty close to a certain thing. That's a fact. That's an experience most people have using it.
So I imagine there'd be times where you might do the user testing in a group, and then there's other times where you might do it as an individual. Is that the case?
I guess it's mostly done one-on-one. I think, there are things like focus groups or things like that where you could, I say you could do that, where you could have a product, especially if it's something where you wanted to get a lot of people's information at once. I would do that in low fidelity. Low fidelity testing where you just want to get eyeballs on that and information, and you want to have the flaws, if there are any, clearly identified, the things that work well for people clearly identified. So in that case, you can have a few people in the room, and you can, as long as it's not something people have to physically use one by one, we can just show them something and get, okay, imagine using this. Do you think you'd be able to do X with it as intended? So you can, but I think at the higher fidelity stage, it's normally one-on-one, because you get the information's more nuanced. And generally what I would ask someone to do is what's called the thinking aloud protocol, where they're talking about their experience as they're doing it. It's like, okay, I'm walking over to the desk now. I see a computer on it. I can't see how to switch it on. Okay, I'll look around the back. God, I really wish the button was on the front, or I wish. So it's people just need to keep rolling like that. And the point is not that everything they say is key, but it will hit on things. And if you're watching somebody and you can see them walk over to the computer, and then you can see them stop for a minute and not do anything, you don't know why. Are they tired? Do they not feel like switching it on? Could they not see where the button was? Did they really wish it was on the front, it was on the back, and they didn't know? So if you're observing somebody do things and they're taking certain action, and then people are talking about what's going on for them as you're doing it, then you can put those two together and have a really good understanding of that. That's not as easy to do in a group, to get that kind of thing. And you may tend to have a couple of people who are quite chatty, who will tend to perhaps dominate, and there could be somebody else who would have really good feedback, and they may not speak up at the start, where you're just wanting to capture as much input as you can to shape the design at that stage. That's okay. But if you really wanted to refine the design, one-on-one tends to work better at that point.
Yeah, I kind of thought that one-on-one sounded better, especially with the brown versus the blue screen affair, if that's what you were doing. Because I guess there'd be the case if you in a group, people giving you the answer that they think you want, as opposed to the honest answer, which is what.
Yeah, that's also, as I said earlier, if people don't think you've put too much time into the model they're testing, they're more happy to be critical or honest, which you do want to know what you need to improve on. And then people also don't want to seem silly, like they don't always have to be careful about who else is in the room observing, because very often you'll get the boss wants to put, of the people who've been tested, or, somebody from their company, and then they may be pointing out some flaws with the product or the system, but they may not feel comfortable doing that, and you always have to anonymize your results. So internally, of course, you would have a number assigned to somebody, you know who that was, but the results are not shared in a way that anyone could say who said what. So no one, you don't want to have anything that inhibits people being honest, as you said.
Without kind of getting off topic, you touched on something which is interesting, which is, the boss in the room wanting to kind of see what the feedback is like, and that possibly restricting answers. How do you manage some of those dynamics?
If you can, you say no. I mean, I think it's often best to just be really frank and say, look, part of what we're wanting to do here is for people to speak freely, and they may point out problems with things that they wouldn't normally say, and we just want to capture that information in case it can support the design moving forwards, and we feel we get better information if the people's responses are not biased in any way. So something along those lines would normally do that. It just it's not like there's something that's secret and nefarious happening here, and you're going to find out about it when a problem is presented to you. No, it's just like it just captures the best information.
Now, obviously, we've touched on so many things in this discussion about changes and what you want to achieve from the user testing. But I am going to ask the question anyway. What happens if we omit user testing?
Well, it may or may not matter. It's a little bit like, what if you omit assessing the strength of the rocks that you're putting foundations in? Might be totally fine. Or there might be a problem that wasn't anticipated. So a couple of, I don't think all situations are suitable for user testing. As I said, if there's an off-the-shelf product or it's it's something that's being repeated almost the same elsewhere, there's many times when, it may not be necessary. You also might find that the designers may very often they will do a great job of anticipating all the ways that something would be used or things could go wrong. And so many times a great design will be produced whether you have user testing or not. What you do accomplish if you do have user testing as part of a design process is you lower your risk, because you've reduced the risk that either users won't like it. That can happen. There's not buy-in from the end users. Either because they didn't feel they had a say, because they didn't, or just what they were expecting doesn't match what was provided to them, and there's problems emerging from that. Or there may be more errors because there's something in the design that is ambiguous, or in the hands of the end users, not the designers, it's just not clear. So there could be risks that come in that could have been mitigated by bringing in and getting the voice from the end users at a point in the design where it's really cheap to change it. Problem with not doing something like that, and then, something is produced or running, then it's more expensive to fix it, to do a second model or something like that. So it just reduces the risk. And because it reduces the risk, I think there's some research that's been done. It shows it tends to lower the overall costs, because any things that the design can be proved at an earlier stage, and especially with digital models and cardboard models where you don't have to build an expensive model. You can build a way that gets user feedback, get that feedback, give that back to the designers, and then you've reduced the project risk by reducing the chance that it doesn't work as intended once it's completed. But as I said, it doesn't mean you need it every time, and many times it's not necessary. So it's just the project risks that I think could be looked at.
And as you've said, it does depend on the project you're working on. So if it's a critical interface, then clearly user testing is important.
Yes.
You want them to be able to use the way it's designed or needs to be designed. However, in some physical spaces, they will develop a workaround maybe that's quite okay.
Well, there's a couple of things. So one is the scale. If it's a very small project, it may not something you could justify spending much money on. If it's a large complex project, then that would be a very reasonable expense. There is decades and decades and decades of data on everything from anthropometrics to visual acuity to causes of human error to anything you want to think about related to the human factors in an ergonomic space. Many, many designs could be done simply by knowing that. Like, how much clearance to allow somebody to do maintenance, or there are standards to guide how wide to make a walkway, or coefficient friction on the ground. There's a lot of data that already exists. So that's why, and many times that's all that's needed for a design, but it may be advantageous at a reasonably early point in the design to bring in input from users and validate the direction the design's going, and or add in something that wasn't expected, because there may be unexpected information you get. You want those surprises to be early. Oh, we didn't think of that. Let's just change that to, oh, it's done. Oh, we didn't think of that. So, but I don't want to invalidate. See, there's a mountain of existing technical and best practice information on anything that could be designed, and that would be the basis for the design. And then the user testing is one way to, ensure the success of that particular design. That's how I would think about it.
So what have been some of the greatest challenges for you in this type of...
Well, I mean, there's a couple. It's, I think from a certain angle, it could look a little bit like voodoo. It could just look a little bit like, why are we asking people what they feel about this, entranceway to something, so from a very empirically minded mindset, it's not as empirical as some really hard data-driven things. So I think probably not everybody one will ever come across will be the hugest fan of it, especially if they haven't seen it. Normally, once people start to see the results, or this is the information that's produced out of it, then it does start to speak to itself. But it isn't as much of a sort of a hard science field as some things, as like the coefficient friction for like slipping, for instance. There's a hard number. It's a little bit of a more subjective field, even though it's possible to give slightly empirical results, and that you could associate it with a questionnaire that asks people to give their ratings on a 1 to 5 scale. So you can get something a bit semi-quantifiable, but it's a bit of a soft science, I would say, compared to some things. And so sometimes it's not fully appreciated for that reason, but I would say it's generally quite well accepted in a lot of projects. I would say that it is. I think also, of course, you always want to, if you've got great insights from the end users, sometimes it's just not practical to have them all included in the project for whatever reason, So it's like, I really thought that was great feedback, but it just doesn't fit into the overall project scope. So, not every finding you find will make sense from that higher viewpoint of the project. So it doesn't always get included, but that's how it goes.
So I was going to ask, what are the key things, or some of the key things for success? And I guess, without sort of giving you the lead on this, the word that I was thinking of was a participative process. And you did mention that the users like to be involved in that process. So let's then, with that thought in mind, go back to my original question, which is what is the key thing for succce in this, do you think? Or what are some
I think this is where having somebody who, I would say some person who is of a good professional standard in human factors ergonomics can design a good user test. Because there needs to be an understanding. Who are the users? What are they going to be doing? Why are they going to be doing it? Where are they going to be doing it? So you would want to answer those questions first. You'd want to have a good idea of what you're testing for. How, what are the things you're wanting to get out of the testing? What are the best situations to put the end user in? Like, you don't want to overwhelm them with a million things in the testing that actually aren't going to contribute to the design. So if it comes from a good understanding of the user, I would say. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, like you said, it's a participatory process where it does mean that the end users are very likely to have good acceptance of the design, and they're likely to be put in a position where they can provide structured feedback that can then go into the design. And whether it's a product or a system, it doesn't matter. It's that feedback from the end users that feeds into the design and helps shape the design.
Thanks for joining us at the Human Factors and Ergonomics Hub, brought to you by the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society of Australia, where human-centred design really matters. If you like this podcast, make us your favourite in your podcast app. We look forward to chatting with you next time.